Welcome, everyone. We are so excited to see you this November 2022. So much is going on. Some sadness, lots of happiness, some worries, other celebrations. They're all about stories. And that is why we're here. My name's Sue Kuentz, and I am the president of the San Antonio Storytellers Association. But better than that, I get to MC tonight's program, and I am delighted to see each and every one of you here. Just want you to know that we are recording this. It will go on our San Antonio Storytellers YouTube channel, so please stop on by there afterwards and watch the stories again and share them with friends and family so that they too will know that stories are alive and well throughout San Antonio and the world. We have many storytellers and just an hour to tell, so I'm going to go ahead and get started by introducing to you a dear friend to all of us, Elizabeth Beamon. She's from Justin, Texas, and she's been coming back here and sharing fabulous stories with us. And without further ado, I'd like for y'all to listen to Elizabeth Beamon.
Thank you, Sue. Thank you, guys. Well, I have a tale today that is honoring my parents for the Day of the Dead that was celebrated yesterday and today, I think. It was 1963, November. My mom had had her sixth child, baby Jeff, in September, early September. And so she'd sort of been just taking care of him and, of course, all the rest of us, 5 other children. And about November, she said to my daddy, I'm going to balance the checkbook today. He said, all right. She loved numbers. And so she got out the checkbook and she was looking at the register when all of a sudden she saw an entry for $200. Now, she didn't know where this $200 had gone, except it did say the First Baptist Church, Brookshire. And she wondered, what is that about? So she called my daddy and he came to the table and she said, Robert, we have an entry here for $200 to the First Baptist Church. What is that? He said, oh, such a deal. When you were in the hospital with baby Jeff, I had the opportunity to buy a plot at the cemetery. She goes, what? I do not want to think about cemeteries or death or anything like that. And he said, Ellie, this was a great deal. She said, where is it? We don't even go to the First Baptist Church. We go to the Lutheran Church. He says, I know. She says, I wanted to go to the Baptist Church, but you said they didn't smoke. So I was going to go to the Lutheran Church. Ellie, I want you to calm down. Take a deep breath. Listen, this was a great deal. They were having plots they were selling at the First Baptist Cemetery. And we had the opportunity to buy a plot that would plant 18 people for $200. That's just unheard of. I could not pass that deal up. She said, I don't want to think about death. I don't want to think about having to think about burying myself or my children or my parents. I don't want to think about it. He said, well, it's too late. I bought it. And she was so angry with him. And they argued back and forth and back and forth. And she said, Robert, why didn't you ask me? He said, Ellie, you were in the hospital with the baby, the new baby. Aren't we so excited about baby Jeff? Yes, I love baby Jeff. I love all our children. Why do we have to think about cemetery plots? He said, Ellie, this was a great deal. 18 people can be buried in this plot. She said, but where is it? He said, it's right next to the Lutheran church, because the Lutheran church bought their church from the First Baptist when the First Baptist moved into town. And so we went to a little country church, the little Lutheran church. And she said, I just wish you would have asked me. And he said, Ellie, are you going to be mad at me? And she said, no. And they both laughed, and the argument was dispelled. Thank you.
Oh, that was lovely. Yes, Dia de los Muertos today, and yesterday was All Saints Day.
Mhm.
Oh, that was perfect. And how wonderful to have all those plots. My goodness. No, that just doesn't happen. Not today. Ah, and true story? True
Your
story?
story.
Ah, Elizabeth, that's fabulous. I love it.
Oh, my.
All right. Well, that was perfect way to begin our evening. Thank you so much, Elizabeth. We're going to fly all the way over to Oklahoma. Chester Weems, that handsome man up there. Chester is actually pretty much in charge, I understand, or maybe not anymore, but very much involved with the territory tellers, as you can see with this backdrop. And I have got to come to his guild gatherings because I know they are wonderful. Our own Karen Archer tells us all about it. So I'm bragging about you now, but Chester, you can talk a little bit more about your guild too, if you like. But he has a short tale to share tonight. So without further ado, take it away, Chester.
Well, thank you, Sue. I appreciate that. I appreciate the advertising promotion also. That's the reason I have my logo up there is, and of course, Territory Tellers is kind of a guild with the Texas Storytelling Association. So we love that affiliation, that connection in there. And by the way, we will be having a retreat in January. We haven't figured out where we're going to have it yet, but we're going to have one. And so we'll put out the word, and perhaps some Texas folks can wander north of the Red River. And we do have some water up here. Maybe not enough, but we have a little bit up here. This is just a little short travelogue kind of thing I have for tonight. I had never been and had been wanting to for several years go to the National Storytelling Festival. I just heard a lot about it. I wanted to go. And of course, this year, Elizabeth Ellis was one of the featured tellers, and I love Elizabeth Ellis. And so I wanted to go hear her. I wanted to take her picture on the national stage. And of course, I take pictures of storytellers, and that gave me a chance to take pictures of a whole bunch of tellers, I hoped. And get out the map. I'm a geographer, by profession a long time ago. And it's a straight shot, about a half mile from my house to the interstate, and it's all the way to Johnson City and Jonesboro. On the interstate. So my wife and I take off, and that's what we're doing for the next 8 days, getting there and getting back. We spend the first night in West Memphis. By the way, there's a casino there. I've discovered if you stay at a casino, the room rates are really cheap. So you might want to consider that, especially I've yet to meet a wealthy storyteller. So anyway, next morning we get up and we're headed east again into the sun and through the Memphis traffic, and that's okay too. It's pretty a new country. We hadn't been that way in years and years and years. We're driving, and often we like to get off let me back up. I like to get off the main 4-lane road. My wife absolutely hates it, and so we usually don't get off very much. But we're headed east on the interstate. We're getting around, I don't know what time it is, 11 o'clock or so, and we're trying to get hungry. And we're starting to see a couple of billboards here and there for the Loretta Lynn Country Kitchen. We thought, why not? That might be kind of an interesting stop. I'm sure it's going to be a little touristy, but that's okay. That's okay. We got to buy a cup somewhere. And so we take the exit, we get off, and we head north across the interstate on the exit. And we see the Country Kitchen that's up kind of on a hill. It's really a pretty sight up there. And you have to drive up this long road to get there. But when you get up there, there's this nice building. It's kind of a long one. It's an old-fashioned building. It's not modern at all, but it's pretty good size. And it's actually kind of, once you get there, it's 3 buildings. On the east end is kind of the tourist part, the gift shop. In the middle is kind of a mini museum to Loretta Lynn. And then the western part was the restaurant. The restaurant itself is kind of a long rectangular box with booths on one side and then tables on the other side and other tables and chairs down the middle. So we go in and we sit down at the booth and we order, but everything's slow motion. Luckily we're not in a hurry anyway. And we both get out our phones and lay our phones on the table there. We've been married 57 years, so there's not much point talking to each other. We did that a long time ago. So we're sitting there and our phones all of a sudden go off. And as you know how stories pop up, and the announcement is Loretta Lynn has just died. I mean, we think, I guess the world is not a big story in the world, but for us to be there, but it was kind of a big deal for us to be sitting in Loretta Lynn's restaurant. And we're only about 6 miles from where her home was, where she passed away. And I've not been a big country fan, except the last few years, I've gotten more and more interested in it. And as I've read and watched some documentaries on Loretta Lynn, I'm really a fan of her. She's a very creative person, nice voice, and a great songwriter. I understand she has hundreds of songs that people have never even heard. So we're sitting there and we're getting this story on the phone. And there's a lady sitting right at a table right next to us, and she sees the same story. And that gives us an opportunity to talk to her. And Velma and I are getting any more. We just like to talk to people. And we just asked her about it. And she said, well, I saw it. And we got to talking to her. And she asked us what we were doing. We said, well, we're going to a story festival. And what's that? And we talked a little bit about that. And she said, oh, I like stories. And then she proceeded to tell a family story. Now, this lady, she's probably, 5'5", maybe in her 50s, mid-50s, wearing work boots, jeans, a Mississippi sweatshirt, cap. Turns out she's a truck driver. Not only just a truck driver, but she owns her own rig. And the Loretta Lynn restaurant is kind of a midpoint for her on a lot of her trips. And so it's a good stop for her. But she starts telling this story, and I'm at it, jump up and grab my phone, and I go sit at her table, and I hold out my phone with the record function, and I start. I hope you can hear that.
His name was Thomas Smith, and he was married to Sarah and Sally Jenkins, but he was a captain in the Virginia Continental, and he was a volunteer, and he had 11 men that he was over.
Well, I just thought that was pretty fascinating, except I can't get it to stop.
And Yorktown, and he fought for Abram Penn.
Well, we're going to stop this sucker one way or the other. So I don't want to play you the whole. I got about 3 minutes of story. The fact is, she had this story down cold. She had done her research, and it was very quickly discovered she's a really sharp lady, really super sharp. And you got to be careful how you judge people, don't you? You really do. But anyway, not only that, then we found out she's a retired Navy electrician. You remember the USS Cole that got the hole blown inside by the terrorists in Yemen? Well, she helped fix it. She was one of the people in the ship that fixed it. But then she started talking about her truck. She'd been driving truck for several years, but she had just bought this new Peterbilt truck, and she was hauling a hazmat load. It was parked out in a parking lot, and that's one of the reasons she was like stopping at this particular place. And so we started asking her questions. She started telling truck stories. And then there's a guy sitting behind her in the booth behind her, and he couldn't take it anymore. And he turned around, and it turns out he was a truck driver. And they started telling truck stories to each other. And that was absolutely fascinating. They started talking about the difficulties when first time you drive into New York City. What do you like? How do you back up a truck when you're in New York City or Houston or one of those places? It was just absolutely fascinating. And I did not realize that there was a guy sitting behind me in that booth. Well, he was a truck driver too. He couldn't take it. He jumped into the conversation. And for the next 30 to 45 minutes, my wife and I are sitting there listening to truck driver stories. And it's absolutely a fantastic 30 to 45 minutes. Well, eventually, of course, everybody has to leave and go. And I see that the truck driver lady, really nice lady, was checking out. And so I go out to get my camera. My good camera is in the car because I knew she was going to drive down this hill, and I wanted to go take her picture as she was driving away. And I did that. and I'm standing on the hill, and she's driving away, and she sees me on the hill taking her picture, and she does that truck driver salute that just makes you feel so good. You know, when you pull the horn, go honk, honk, whatever it does, you know, the real long trucker horns. And I just felt like I was king of the world. And I shot pictures of her driving all the way down the hill and driving away on the interstate. She's on her way to Houston with a load of hazardous chemicals. Now, I discovered, and this is one of the rules I want to share with you, isn't it amazing what, if you show real interest in people and is honest, what they'll share with you in conversation? I found out that her truck payment was $3,400 a month. She spent about $600 a month on maintenance fees. She was paid $7,200 to haul that hazardous chemical to Houston. And it's going to take her about a week. She was just absolutely fascinated. I gave her my card. I was hoping she would contact me by email so I could send her some pictures. Probably, though, I will never hear from her and see her again. It's a shame because I'm looking on my computer screen right now at the picture of this lady, big old smile, and she just as it was an absolute joy to meet. Well, Velma and I get back in the car. We head on to the storytelling thing. Although why go to a storytelling thing? We just had the great experience. But we wind up getting in Jonesboro and Johnson City, and there, you know, I meet people that I've never heard of before. They're there too. I met a lawyer who was getting ready to take off from his practice because he's working on his book. It turns out he knows more about Oklahoma history than I know because he did environmental law in Oklahoma and filed charges against a bunch of people. I'm not sure what it was he did. And then I met a guy who's on his fourth book, and I just love those little personal stories. And of course, I got to hear all the big names. I got to see Elizabeth several times. Main purpose of the trip, I just loved that. And so I'm just soaking up stories everywhere. My wife and I finally leave. But on our way out, we stop at a harvest festival, which was a few miles away. And at the harvest festival, there's several booths, and there were several ladies, including a lady who sold soaps. And her soaps all had names on them. And I started talking to her, and she started telling me about her family. And so I grabbed my phone again, and
My grandmother, Ruth May, lived on a place called Young's Branch in Buchanan County, Virginia. And she and her 5 siblings went to school. They didn't have a car or anything, so they had to walk to school, and they had a path right over the creek. They crossed the creek 5 times.
And so, you know, obviously I'm not going to play the whole thing for you, but isn't that just wonderful? And I got to watch apple juice being made and applesauce being made, and it was just great. And so that's about the end of our trip. We start coming home. About half of the way home, I find out I got COVID at the festival, so that's another little wrinkle in the whole thing. But I got to tell you, of all the things I did, a National Storing Festival, Elizabeth Ellis, who I just absolutely adore, all these other folks, but I don't think there was anything that could match standing on that hill, that blue truck pulling those hazardous chemicals going down that hill, and the lady blowing the horn. That's a memory I'm going to have for a long time. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Bravo. Oh, we love that. To the heart, love it, with all those fabulous tales of the stories outside the festival. Thank you so much. That was fabulous. All right, Chester, I know you're saying something, but you're muted. Ugh.
My phone is not cooperating with me. We're not shut off, so I just shut that sucker off. And it still won't shut. I just threw it in the trash. So it can do whatever the heck it wants. But again, thank you, Sue. I appreciate what you guys did. I really appreciate an opportunity to be part of this.
Oh, you bet. Thank you, Chester. That was lovely. Thank you for letting us just ride along with you. That was fabulous. Honk, honk. All right. Our next tailor, without further ado, comes all the way from West Virginia. And every time she has a fabulous story, and I do hang on every word that Judi Tarowksky says. I know you will love whatever she says tonight. Welcome, Judi.
Thank you, Sue. It's really great to be here tonight with everybody. The story I'm going to tell is by Anna Egan Smucker. She was a Weirton girl. And the book that she wrote was called Golden Delicious, The Cinderella Apple Story. And Anna has graciously given me permission to tell it. It was September 1905, and the Stark Brothers Nursery in Louisiana, Missouri was just bustling with activity. Small parcels of apple samples were arriving in the warehouse, and for good reason. Paul and Lloyd Stark, the Stark brothers, had put word out across the country that they were looking for the best new apple. They wanted an apple that would be crowned queen of the apple world. So farmers from all over the country were sending in their apple samples. Well, if you're going to find a good apple, you have to taste them. And that's what the brothers were doing. But apple after apple was a huge disappointment. And Lloyd, looked up from an apple he had just tasted. And he told his brother, he says, Paul, I thought this apple was going to really be good, but I feel like the prince that's been trying on the glass slipper on one stinky foot after another to find the princess, but this apple is not it. And his brother said, don't worry. He says, we're going to find that queen of the apple world. Well, meanwhile, all the way back in Clay County, West Virginia, way down in the center of the state, a farmer by the name of Anderson Mullins was out inspecting his new farm. He had just bought the property, and he was climbing up on the hill behind his house, and everything that summer had been very dry. I imagine a lot like Texas has been this summer. Everything was just brown and dry and crunchy until he got to the top of the hill, and there was an apple orchard, and all the trees looked pretty sad. They were withered and dried up. But then there was one tree that caught his eye. And it did so because it was full of beautiful, shiny green leaves and some beautiful golden apples. Oh, Anderson couldn't believe his eyes, and he reached out and grabbed one and took a bite. It was juicy, it was sweet, it was spicy, and it was one of the best apples he'd ever tasted. So he figured he had a pretty special apple tree. He didn't know where it came from, but he was going to take good care of it. And for the next 8 years, Anderson's apples, those golden apples, won blue ribbons at the Clay County Fair. And the special thing about these apples was that when Anderson picked them in the fall and put them in his fruit cellar, in the spring, each apple would come out just as juicy and sweet as the day he had picked it. So he knew he had a very special apple tree. Well, in the spring of 1914, Anderson went into his fruit cellar and picked out 3 of the best looking of those golden apples. And he packed them up in a little box with some sawdust and sent them off to the Stark Brothers Nursery. He knew about their hunt for the best new apple in the world. When that box of golden apples arrived in Missouri, Paul opened the box and he said, golden apples from Anderson Mullins. And his brother Lloyd says, oh, don't even bother with the yellow apple. They don't taste good. They don't keep. They just don't have a good texture. Just don't even bother. But his brother had already tasted it. And he cut a slice and he shoved it into his brother's mouth. And he said, here, taste this. You're not going to believe it. And it was crisp and it was juicy and sweet. And it was from the previous fall. So Paul was always the brother who went out checking on any new prospect apples. So he waited all that summer until September. And he bought a train ticket and took the train all the way from Missouri into Charleston, West Virginia, the state capital. Then he had to hire a horse to ride down to Clay County. And he reached the little community of Odessa, West Virginia in Clay County, and he went out on one of the roads and found a mailbox marked A. Mullins. He knocked on the door of the farmhouse, but no one answered. So he figured he'd go up on the hill and try to find that apple tree himself. So he made his way up that very steep hill, and he wasn't used to steep hills from Missouri. And he came upon that apple tree with the shiny green leaves and these golden apples. He couldn't help himself. He reached out and picked one and took a bite. And then he heard footsteps behind him. And he turned around, he said, my name's Paul Stark. He said, that's some apple you've got here. And the farmer said, well, I'm Anderson Mullins, I sent you some. Well, Paul wanted to buy that apple tree. So what they did, they made arrangements for Paul to take some cuttings from the tree, little sticks, I guess you'd call them. And they built a chicken wire cage around that tree, top and all around all the sides, and ran a wire down to Anderson's house with a battery-powered burglar alarm so nobody could get into the tree. Well, they agreed upon the price for those little cuttings. Paul went back to Missouri, and he and his brother grafted them on some other apple trees. And in 5 years, they had a little orchard, these beautiful golden apples. Well, in 1919, they entered it in the Pomological Society of the World apple competition, and their apple was named Queen of the Apple World. And that is how the golden delicious apple came about. Now, scientists think that the apple, the golden delicious, was a chance cross between the golden Rainette apple and the Grimes golden apple that was discovered in Wellsburg, West Virginia, in Brooke County, about 15 miles from where I live now. And scientists say that every golden delicious apple in the world has its origins in that apple tree in Clay County, West Virginia. And in 1995, the West Virginia legislature declared the golden delicious apple the official apple of West Virginia. And Clay County has a golden delicious apple festival where they make a 6-foot in diameter apple pie out of golden delicious apples. So with the scientists saying that every golden delicious apple in the world comes from that apple tree in Clay County, every time you take a bite of a golden delicious apple, you're having a bite of West Virginia sunshine from an apple just like this. Thank you.
Ah, that was lovely. And oh, my mouth is watering. Oh, and yes, we actually get those down here in Texas.
Yes, they grow just about everywhere. So,
Oh, I don't know if we can grow them, but we certainly get them in our grocery stores.
oh,
That
good.
is so wonderful. Thank you so much. And the festival, does it include storytellers?
No, we have to work on that.
Okay. That was fabulous. Thank you so much, Judy. All right. Nathan, he is joining us all the way from Georgia. And I know he's having a good time in Georgia, but it sounds like you'll be home with us for a little while in December, which is fabulous. And I believe Nathan has a poem to share with us.
Yes. Thank you, Miss Kuentz.
You're welcome.
Now this poem I'd like to share with you is actually a song that came from a Halloween pageant that I put on back when I was in the 2nd grade, which was 22 years ago. It's one of my favorite moments from my school childhood, and there are 4 songs in this play, in this pageant. It's a Halloween play, but one of them is about, the theme of the song is sharing, and one of them is exclusively about giving. And the song is called "Sharing Is Everything." It was written by John Jacobson and Alan Billingsley, so it should be good. You're probably all familiar with John Jacobson because he writes very good children's songs. And so first I will recite it to you in a poem, and then I could sing it to you. I will sing it to you. Okay, here's my poem, "Sharing is Everything" by John Jacobson and Alan Billingsley. What good is being the belle of the ball if nobody joins your dance? What good is seeing that you have it all when nobody else had a chance? What good is reaching the mountaintop if you stand there all alone? And what good is picking the cream of the crop when nobody knows what you've grown? Oh, we have plenty for giving, and we have so much to share. And that's the reason for living, and that's the reason we care. 'Cause sharing is everything, and caring's not anything unless I can share it with you. What good is being the highest flyer or being the richest king? And what good is being the finest choir if nobody hears you sing? Oh, we have plenty for giving, and we have so much to share. And that's the reason for living. And that's the reason we care. Because sharing is everything. And caring's not anything unless I can share it with you. Because sharing is everything. And caring's not anything unless I can share it with you. Sharing always comes back to you. And that's my poem. And now, here's how it is sung. What good is being the belle of the ball if nobody joins your dance? What good is seeing that you have it all when nobody else had a chance? What good is reaching the mountaintop if you stand there all alone? And what good is picking the cream of the crop when nobody knows what you've grown? Oh, we have plenty for giving, and we have so much to share. And that's the reason for living. And that's the reason we care. 'Cause sharing is everything. And caring's not anything unless I can share it with you. What good is being the highest flyer or being the richest king? And what good is being the finest choir if nobody hears you sing? Oh, we have plenty for giving, and we have so much to share. And that's the reason for living. And that's the reason we care. 'Cause sharing is everything. And caring's not anything unless I can share it with you. 'Cause sharing is everything, and caring's not anything unless I can share it with you. Sharing always comes back to you. And that's my song and poem for you. Like I said, thank you. Like I said, it was from one of my favorite moments in elementary school because I really enjoyed putting on that play. And luckily I kept the script, and to this day, that's why I was able to remember the song so well.
Yes. And you just shared so much with us through the caring song. And a lot of that could be put right into all of those stories that you've told us before because they're all about you, which I think is marvelous. We love you, Nathan. Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right.
And I'm really glad to share all my stories and songs and poems with you over the years.
We are too. We've got to watch you grow up. That's such a present for us. All right, we're going to move on. We have another Oklahoma gal here tonight, and it's always an honor when she joins us because, of course, everyone knows Fran Stallings. She's doing so much for the earth now. Her tales go, of course, towards science, empowering us to do something about our world that we live in right now, along with many other tales that she tells. But I do love her science tales. And I hope, Fran, you'll be able to share with the folks what may be coming up with you that maybe we can join in on and listen. But without further ado, Fran Stallings.
Well, thank you. The story I'm going to tell today is more of a history story, and this does come from Oklahoma. But to start, I'll tell you that I met my Oklahoma City husband when we were both in college in Massachusetts. And my first Thanksgiving in Massachusetts, some of the local students invited me over for Thanksgiving dinner, and the table was beautifully set with silver and crystal and things, but there was no food on the table, just 4 grains of corn on each plate. And they explained that that was in memory of the first Thanksgiving that the Pilgrims suffered through after their hardships and their sicknesses, and before they had learned how to grow food and so forth. They were down to 4 grains of corn apiece, and it was set. The table was set that way for Thanksgiving to remind them of what their forefathers had been through. Well, when Gordon invited me down to Oklahoma City to meet his family and for our first Thanksgiving, the table was beautifully set with linen and crystal and silver and big bowls of food on the table and a great big bowl of turnips. And I said, "Wow, you folks must really like turnips." And they said, "Well, not particularly, but there's a story." And this is the story. You see, Clara and Charlie McMillan grew up in Illinois, and all they ever wanted to do was farm. They grew up farming adjacent farms. They married, and they wanted a farm of their own, but all that good Illinois farmland in southern Illinois belonged to somebody. So the only way they could work a farm was as tenant farmers. They put in all the work, they gathered all the crops, and most of the crops went to pay their rent on the land, and they were getting nowhere fast. But back in 1889, this long time ago, I said it was history, they heard about the land run in Oklahoma. Now, you Texas people must at least know that way back in the 1880s, Oklahoma was a patchwork of different Indian Nation territories, and as more and more Indians were moved off of their own original land and heaved into Oklahoma, which was the desert, nobody wanted it. As they were heaved into Oklahoma, the map changed every few years as more and more. But there was one section in the middle called the unassigned lands. And as farmland in Kansas and Texas and Missouri got more and more occupied, people began looking, non-Indian people began looking at that unassigned land, and they began saying, well, these Indians, they're not farming much. They're just hunting and living by their own way. Now, if we, with some real settlers could come in there, we could just improve that land a whole lot. And some people even snuck in sooner than it was legal to do. In those days, non-Indian people could only live in Oklahoma if they were married or adopted into an Indian family, working for Indian families, or in the western part of the state, the Oklahoma Territory, if they were working on cattle ranges or renting land for cattle ranges. But these people said, we ought to be able to have that land. And they made so much noise about it. Those folks were called boomers. And the ones who came in sooner than it was legal for them to come in and settle, well, they were called Sooners. And if you've ever wondered where Sooner Boomer came from, that's it. Lawbreakers. Anyway, finally, laws were passed that this unassigned lands in the middle would be opened for settlement. But so many people wanted land. How are you going to divide it? And that's when they got the bright idea of the horse race, the race to settle, that on the stroke of noon on April 22nd of 1889, a starter pistol would go off and trains would come in from the north and south. There was a train line through at the time. And they would come in with people who wanted to settle along the train track, live in towns, and people who wanted to settle land, wanted to claim farmland or ranch land, they would come in by Well, to tell the truth, they came in by horseback. They came in racing surreys. They came in on mules. There were a few on bicycles. That was the latest thing. They came in however they possibly could. Well, before that day actually happened, Clara and Charlie had heard about it and they decided this was their chance. So they sold everything they could, gave away what they couldn't, that they didn't need, packed up one wagon load, and I imagine it was about the size of a pickup bed, that wagon, packed so high you didn't ride in the wagon unless you were driving in it, you walked, which was good because old Red couldn't go very fast, and Brownie, the younger horse, was doing most of the pulling, and the milk cow, of course, was tied on behind. And cows have just two speeds. There's Mosey and there's Stampede, and so they just walked. The kids walked along. They slept under the wagon at night. They made their way down from Illinois all the way to Arkansas City, Kansas, which is as close as they could get in at the time. And Charlie said, you know, I think if we try to make the run in the wagon, a wheel's going to come off. Somebody's clinging to the side like a limp. It's going to fall off and break their neck. That I'm going to take Brownie because she's young and fast. I'll make the run. I'll make a claim and send for you. So that's what they did. Long story short, they got him. The gunshot went off at 12 noon. They didn't hear anything from him for days. Finally, a letter came and he sent directions. And the wagon with just old Brownie pulling and everybody else walking came all the way down to a claim that he had made in Yukon, which is west of Oklahoma City, where Oklahoma City is now. It was Oklahoma train station then. And he found a nice piece of land with a couple trees on it even. If you've been west of Oklahoma City, you know that was unusual. And a little spring. And by this time it was May. Well, they settled the family under the wagon at first. It was pretty warm by then. Slowly got around to building a sod hut. They put in a garden with as much as they could, but they couldn't plant crops, not in May. It was too late to plant most things. They took care of the animals and got them fenced. And for food, they milked the cow. They let the milk can cool in the cool water of the stream, skimmed the cream off the top, churned butter, and sold the butter in town. So here was a typical meal. With the money from the butter sale, they had bought flour from Kansas. And so they had biscuits and they had butter and they had skim milk. That was pretty good. That kept them going. And pretty soon they had fresh vegetables. And they were so eager for what they were going to be able to plant. They worked hard during the summer. They plowed up the land. They put in a crop of winter wheat. And they waited for the wheat to come up. But through that first winter, it was hard times. The snow didn't fall. That was a mercy, they thought, until they realized in the spring when they waited for that winter wheat to revive and start coming up in 1890, that winter wheat was just all shriveled. By May, when it should have been knee-high, hardly anything. By June, when they should have been harvesting, maybe a bushel an acre, not enough to live on. And the creeks were drying up because there'd been no rain. I can appreciate that after this last summer. And the ponds were drying up. Their spring kept going, though, so they could keep their animals going. But this time, there was no water to put on the garden. And they looked forward to the winter and wondered if they could possibly stay on for a second winter. If only it would rain again. How could they make it through the second winter? Neighbors were leaving. The wagons were rolling again. Well, finally, in the fall, a gentle rain started, and the grass turned green again, and they had a few weeks to plant something that would grow fast so that they'd have something to eat through the winter. And you know, if you plant your turnips in September, they will grow and you'll have turnip greens, you'll have turnip bulbs, you'll have fresh turnips, you can pickle turnips, you can roast them, you can mash them, all kinds of things. So they grew turnips. And what they had to eat that fall of 1890 was turnips. Now, the trouble is they also fed it to the animals. And when they fed turnips to the chickens, the eggs came out tasting kind of like turnips. And when they fed turnips to the cows, the butter and the milk came out. I mean, the milk and the cream came out tasting like turnips. So, of course, if you made butter or cheese, they tasted like turnips too. So, although turnips with mashed roasted turnips with butter was really good, but you got a double dose of turnip flavor. And when you fed the turnips to the hogs, and then finally in November with cold weather, slaughtered the hogs, the bacon and ham tasted like turnips. So if you put bacon and ham in with your turnip greens, you got another double dose of turnips. The ladies shared recipes for turnips. And there was word that some of the cowboys were even making turnip beer, but that does not bear thinking of. However, they had turnips to get through that winter. Great big turnips to roast for Thanksgiving if you didn't catch a wild turkey. Beautiful little purple and white turnips, hang them upside down by the root to decorate your red cedar Christmas tree. Finally, in the spring, normal, good rain. The crops for those who had managed to put in another round of winter wheat, they came up green and lush. And they harvested a good crop of Oklahoma Gold wheat. And they were able to buy the tools and the clothes and the things they needed to build a proper house. And Clara sent for her sister, who was Gordon's grandmother, which is how the story came down in the family. And they said they liked having a bowl of turnips on the table at Thanksgiving because it reminded them of a time when that's what there was to eat. And they were so grateful to have something else. That's the story of 1890, the year of the turnip.
Yes. Oh, so grateful to have something else. Yes. I can't even imagine tasting a little bit of that turkey, but not tasting like turkey. A little bit of that bacon from the pig, but not tasting like bacon. Lovely. I think all of our Thanksgivings will look a little bit different this year. I certainly, for one, am not growing turnips, although I wish I were, but I will purchase some and see what I can do. I'll find those recipes and see if we can include that in our Thanksgiving meal. Thank you
I
so
tell
much.
this story to Oklahoma students who are, it's third grade now to include Oklahoma history in the curriculum. I tell that story and it's dismaying how many of them have never tasted turnips, let alone ever heard of them. And so we challenge teachers to bring, I've never heard of anybody who was allergic to turnips. So teachers could bring them in. I mean, unlike peanuts or something like that.
Right.
And try them out.
Perfect. I love that. Lucky third graders. Fabulous. All right, we're going to move right on. Larry Thompson, our cowboy in residence, right, really close to San Antonio in a nice little town called Seguin, Texas, would like to share a tale with you right now. Let's give Larry
Seguin, Texas. You know, Seguin comes from the Spanish word for next to. So officially we're next to San Antonio. And of course, Juan Seguin, you know, who was one of those famous guys back from the founding days. But I'll share something new with you this evening, and I'll introduce it. I'll introduce it like this. Now, occasionally, a fella finds himself in unfamiliar surroundings, You can imagine that first wagon driver peeking down from the Continental Divide into that vast expanse opening up before him. Or that first caballero who said to himself, wouldn't it be cool if I climbed up on the back of that huge animal and rode around? Or the first guy who told his buddy, I bet you won't eat the next thing that comes out of that chicken's butt. But you know, we've got to dedicate our time as storytellers. We've got to celebrate those men and women who step into strange territory and take an intimidating first glimpse into the unknown. And that's what this tale is. It's a piece of poetry I call A Cowboy Goes to Starbucks. Now, while waiting for the bank to open on an elsewise normal day, a cowpoke ventured in where the man buns love to play. He felt quite out of place, his dusty Stetson pulled down low, but he took his place in line for a simple cup of joe. The bustle of the place had him feeling out of sorts, like that time his wife had drug him to the beach in flowered shorts. But if all these kids could do it, he felt sure he'd get her done, unlike that ocean trip where his pale knees outshined the sun. Now, he tried to pay attention so when his time finally came, he wouldn't be just standing there with his tongue tied up in shame. But the shouts, they came so quickly, just like an auctioneer. Who'll give me $1 next dollar? Who's going to bid for? Who's got the 7 and 8? But this was totally foreign to his ear. There was Grandi, Venti, half skim, Sporetto, wheat and soy, upside down, the 2-shot mocha, and he thought he heard chamoy. While lost in thought, he realized his time in line had come, and he thought for half a sec of spinning out and heading home. But he screwed his courage down and he strode up to the bar. He tipped his hat and met the glare of a barista named Shamar. Now, he weren't rightly sure if Shamar was she or he, and he didn't want to offend, so he just said, coffee. Shamar's eyes rolled back, and the cowboy scrunched his brow when she asked, how you take it? And he said, in the mouth. And as he's thinking perhaps he don't even know how to drink, she says, no, what's your order? And her eyes don't even blink. His brow broke out in sweat. Seems his collar cinched right up. Black, hot, in a cup, he managed. And he saw her eyes light up. Americano, she proclaimed. And he wasn't sure what to say. So he just asserted, yes, I'm from Texas in the good old USA. And while he hoped that would do, he resolved to walk away if they came at him with a Q-tip to mine for DNA. Instead, she began a query in an elongated breath, a list of extra add-ins in a verbal dance of death. Full calf, half calf, light calf, decaf, caramel, mocha, pumpkin foam, sprinkle shots, spice or sauce for cream. Do you need room? His brain was just a swimming and he felt a little dazed. He slowly nodded yes, and Shamar was left unfazed. 4, she snarled out as she held her marker up. Dismayed, he answered, no, just 1. And she wrote it on the cup. He was relieved to slide on over so the next in line could go, and he stood in quiet stead awaiting his morning cup of joe. Now, 20 minutes later, a fella in a tied tight bun held up a paper cup and hollered out, no, just 1. Well, seeing no one else approach and believing this was planned, the cowboy stepped on up and took that cup into his hand. And he bolted for the door like a bronc just out the gate. Didn't pause to take a sip. He just didn't want to wait. But later, in his truck when he finally took his break. Well, he wasn't sure if he had Joe or liquid coffee cake. And somehow in that joint, for a fee that weren't too bad, the cowboy got an extra hot, extra foam, extra salt, Ronnie and a venti, double cup, double sweet, double pump, pumpkin spice, mocha latte, hazelnut, long shot, half calf, decaf, half breath, half ice, well stirred. And it was the best one of those he had ever had.
Well stirred. Delicious. Oh my goodness. Oh, thank you so much, Larry. That was amazing. Come back again. All right, our next teller, we're going to move right on to Jane McDaniel, who just recently came back from Ireland. It sounds like she has one of the shortest tales ever to tell tonight.
Yes, this is the shortest story ever told. My brother, who died recently, used to tell this, and we'd pull the curtains and he'd go, "Whoa," trying to scare the two of us. We all slept in two beds in one room in a small cottage off the Tipperary Road. So the story starts. It was a dark and stormy night. The rain came down in torrents. The crew, they said to the captain, "Captain, tell us a tale." And so the tale began. It was a dark and stormy night. The rain came down in torrents. The crew to the captain, and you know the rest of the story. That's my tale.
And you're sticking to it.
Yes.
Yes, I'm so glad you told that. My goodness, it's been a long time and,
Yes.
and a short while. I love
You've heard
that.
that. Yeah.
Fabulous. Thank
Yeah,
you so
thank you.
much, Jane. And our next teller is John Munley. Come join us, John. John was our MC last month, and now he gets to share a story. You are muted, John.
Now, am I unmuted?
You are.
Okay.
You're perfect.
Okay. Well, it's a sad but a just story I have to tell you tonight. It's about a man whose name was Finster McGanigal. And Finster lived on the west coast of Ireland, about 20 kilometers northwest of Ballina. He lived in a small town named Banashia. And Finster came from a wonderful family. Everybody loved his da and his grandpa. They were famous for their generosity, their kindness, their help to everyone who needed it. And they had been very, very instrumental in building the whole town and helping people get their cottages built and helping them when they needed loans and materials and the like. But as is often the case, it didn't go down through the generations. Finster was a horrible man, an absolutely horrible man. He was cheap and he was mean and unbelievably vain. And goodness knows, he had nothing to be vain about. Well, Finster, when his da and his granddad died, inherited much of the town. And once a month, he would go around and collect the dreaded rents. Well, Finster had gone to a fair years ago, and a vendor trying to get rid of stuff that no one else would take convinced Finster to dress in a gold pair of spangled pants, a shirt that felt like greasy fishtails, and the most ridiculous purple derby hat. And this guy said that this is what it looks like among the stars in America. And Fenster was convinced, and he bought it. And this was his outfit that he wore every month when he went to collect the rents. Now, as generous as Fenster's da and granda had been, he was just the opposite. If someone was sick, if someone was dying, if someone had been in hard times and they couldn't come up with the rent, Fenster would immediately start to evict them. Made no difference that they didn't have any place to go. Well, this one day he's out and he's going from house to house collecting the rents. And Fenster always hid his money in a money belt under his golden pants. And he'd have just a few coins that he had in his pocket in case anybody asked him for anything. He'd say, I just have a halfpenny here and I need it. Well, Fenster had gotten to the top of the hill. He had collected his last rent for the month, and he was just about to turn around and go back down to his house, where his wife Priscilla was waiting for him, and she was just as horrible as he was, but also as vain and also as mean. But as Fenster turned around to walk down the hill, he heard a terrible moan behind him. And he quickly turned around and he looked, and there was this, oh, God-forsaken poor old woman lying in the street, dressed in rags, not an ounce of fat on her body, just skin and bones. And she had a terrible rash on her face and pustules. And she just reached out a craggy arm to him and said, Sir, would you please just share a little water with me? Well, Fenster just stood back for her and he said, look at you. If you had only spent your life like I do, doing productive work, would be in the shape that you're in now. So you've made your bed, so lie in it, even if it's alongside a road somewhere. And then he turned around and he started walking down the hill. Well, he'd only taken 3 steps for himself when he heard a loud boom. Oh my God, and he saw a flash of light. And he spun around, and no longer was there a craggy old woman there, but there was this tall, beautiful woman. She must have been 7 feet tall, and in back of her was like the sun was shining around her. And she had these penetrating eyes, and she looked at Fenster and she said, "You are a bad man, and I will curse you." And then she disappeared. Well, Fenster was very, very shaken up, to say the least. And so he turned around and he started down the hill again. He wanted to get home as quickly as possible. But after he'd taken 2 steps, his gold pants and his underwear fell down around his knees. And there he was, naked as the day he was born. Well, I don't know, but in most Irish villages, dinner doesn't take place in the home until after dark. It gives the farmers time to come in from the fields to clean up a bit and have a wee dram if it had been a good harvest the year before. Well, while they were doing that, the young boys of the neighborhood, as young boys do, would run around with each other looking for trouble. And then this particular day, one of the local boys, Sean, had a visitor. His cousin Jacques had come over from France and was going to stay with them for a month. Well, all the other boys called him Jack, and so did Sean. Well, they were running up and down the hill looking for something to get into, and there they saw Finster at the top of the hill, naked as a jaybird. And they ran up and they hid behind the bushes to see what would happen. Well, Finster quickly pulled up his pants and he started down the hill again, and then another couple of steps, down go the pants, down go the underpants. Now, Finster was lucky because in the village there were benches in front of every house where people would sit out. So Finster began to run from bench to bench to hide his nakedness. But the boys started following him down the hill, and the French boy, Jack, yelled after him, "La derrière, la derrière," which means in French, his backside. And so they followed him all the way home, and Priscilla was there. She said, "What happened to you?" And he told her. He was so ashamed. Well, this became the fun in the village every month when Finster went out to collect the rents. The boys would hide in the bushes, and when he'd start back down the hill and his pants would fall down and his underwear would fall down, they'd yell, "La derrière, la derrière," even though Jack had gone back to France a long time ago. But this went on for years, and poor Finster didn't do well. He looked terrible. He was sickly. He hardly ever came out of the house except to collect his rents. And one day, Priscilla had come back from the market, and Finster was lying in the corner, and he looked like he was dying. In fact, he was. Well, she went over to him, and the first thing she checked before she checked to see how Finster was this money bill still there? It was, and she gave a good smile and thinking of all the things she could buy with the money that Finster had in the belt if he should die. Well, he gestured to her to please come down and put her ear next to his mouth. And when she did, he said, "Be careful of how you treat people you meet around the road." And with that, he died. And that's the sad but just story of Finster McGonagall.
Another Irish tale. Love it. Love it. All right. That was pretty cool. But thank you all so much. Everyone can unmute. We're just going to say a quick goodbye. Again, I want to thank each and every one of you for being here. Thank you so much. And John Hale, thank you so much for being our host. This is being recorded, so eventually we will have this on our San Antonio Storytellers YouTube channel. So please check it out and feel free to share it with your friends and family. And hopefully we'll see you back the first Wednesday in December. I can't believe I'm saying that. The last month before 2023. So thank you all so much. I loved every story and poem.
And song too.
Yes, and song too, of course. All right. So thank you all. Good night.
Good night.
Yes, goodbye and happy Thanksgiving.
Have an apple.
Yes.